Hello and welcome everybody to the Humanitarian Statement, where in this various video series we try to capture best practice and hear the views of senior colleagues coming from operations. Today I'm delighted to welcome Yacoub Hillo, the Humanitarian Coordinator, Resident Coordinator in one of the biggest operations, humanitarian operations in the world, Syria. Yacoub, it's great to have you here. I would like to ask with the first question about, which is related to leadership. In a complex situation like Syria, where you have multiple actors, and particularly also humanitarian actors within the humanitarian country team, how do you go about bringing the UN, the NGOs in a very complex situation together in terms of moving forward? What is your leadership approach within the team?
First of all, thank you very much, Panos, to you and the STITE team to have me with you. To answer your question, I think there are some basics that need to be there. And I want to believe conviction and courage are two first starters, but also clarity of what is it that we are there to do in a context as complex and as dynamic, a conflict as vicious as the one we have in Syria, humanitarian needs growing by the hour, the number of humanitarian actors multiplying by the day. So without courage, conviction, and clarity of where we want to reach, and in reach we want to reach people with life-saving assistance, with support, and with protection, it is important to recall these three qualities. But leadership is not only one person. It takes a team to have leadership. And here is where I believe particularly in the last 3.5 years or so, if you look at the configuration and composition of the UN agencies operating, UN humanitarian agencies operating in Syria, I think the quality of the leadership there also has dramatically changed in positive terms, but also the caliber of staff who have been deployed by the respective organizations to Syria. That also brought a lot of strength to what the United Nations, but also our partners need to do. So when we talk about leadership in a context as complex as Syria, yes, it is important to have the first among equals trying to rally everybody around common goals under one plans and to achieve joint and shared objectives. But it is not just one person, it's collective leadership to respond to a crisis like this.
Moving forward to deliver, moving forward towards operations. And to do that, I want to ask you about the challenge of access. In Syria, we hear in the news a lot about besieged areas, people who are trapped, civilians who really find themselves not just in the middle of conflict, but also not having access to the most basic facilities or basic supplies that are in place. How do you go in Syria about reaching these hard-to-reach areas and bringing humanitarian aid to people who are in an impossible situation?
We have made some progress over the last couple of years. We have been able, as United Nations actors, to reach quite a significant number of people in need cross-border. Mm-hmm. And this came as a result of Security Council Resolution 2165, which was passed in July 2014. That helped us, legally speaking, to deliver aid, life-saving assistance to people from Turkey, from Jordan, from Iraq, and that helped solve some of the problems that we faced, not all of them. We are still battling on a daily basis, and I'm sure you have seen in recent months the agitation and the push and the pull that we continue to exert to reach the people in besieged areas. 19 locations, 592,000 people trapped there, all of which locations we are able to reach overland. And in fact, we have been able, through painful but patient negotiations, but also using the leverage of member states that have influence on any of the parties to the conflict in the context of the International Syria Support Group. We have been able, I am happy to say, to reach an increasing number of people in besieged areas since the beginning of this year. Compared to the same period last year, when we had reached only 1% of the population, this year, so far, we have reached half of that population. It's a good start. It's not the end, because we still have half of the people trapped that we are not able to reach in a systematic or a continuous way.
Let me move to another topic. In the last 10 years, as a humanitarian community, we have gone through a reform. We created the clusters 10 years ago. We had the transformative agenda following Pakistan and Haiti in 2010, 2011. Now we've just come out from the World Humanitarian Summit, the first ever summit of bringing everybody together, where we all commit to do things better. What do you see different this time? What is it that really hopefully gets us to a yet higher level and better efficiency and results in terms of where we're going?
Panos, it's good that we're having this discussion just a few days after the first ever World Humanitarian Summit. I think the fact that 173 countries came to this event, participated with a lot of vigor, is testimony of many things. But one of which things is the fact that the state of the world we live in today really needs serious intervention and help. Because if you look at the map and you look at the scale and the magnitude, but also the number of crises around the world, and you look at the system with which we have worked for the last 20, 25 years, in terms of how we fund humanitarian response, how we devise our programs, how we organize ourselves as actors in the humanitarian domain, I think that has delivered the expected results over the last 2 decades, but now we are at a moment when we really needed the summit for new approaches to be agreed. And perhaps one of the strongest aspects of this is that the way member states are now going to be looking at funding humanitarian operations, being part of the process and not only be looked at as ATM machines. The way there is an acknowledgement that the existing sources of humanitarian funding have either come to a breaking point or have actually broken because of the scale and the magnitude. So there has to be additional thinking, but also additional sources of funding, including perhaps from transitional or development sources, which has not always been the case.
Syria is one of the first, actually it is the first level 3 crisis. We're also part of it. There was an operational peer review that was undertaken at some point to the crisis. Looking back at it, this is almost a year ago, how helpful has this been in terms of the operation in such a complex situation like Syria?
It was good to have you there and the team. And when we have people like you, friends, but also colleagues who have the objective eye to look at what is being tried and done in a complex setting like this, not only that it helped in terms of the substance, and I will come to that in a minute, but it also takes away from the sense of isolation. Because there is that. When you're working inside Syria, there is the perception that how can you be able to work and live and move around inside if you are not in cahoot with some or one or the other party to this conflict? And that is a misperception that we try to push back all the time. But your being there took away from this sense of isolation. Your being there in a team as diverse as the peer review team was, both from the UN but also from the NGO partners. It gave us the opportunity to actually, in a self-reflective, but also looking at ourselves critically, because there is no perfection in a context like this. There is only the possibility to try and build on what you have been able to achieve and do better.
One of the important actors in the humanitarian family that works in Syria is the national NGOs, is the local actors, and really the richness they bring in terms of knowledge, in terms of ability to move, to understand, and support the delivery. Can you tell us a little bit about the national NGOs and this local approach that you have taken in the Syrian context in particular? How has it worked? What has been your experience?
No one knows Syria better than the Syrians. The culture of having a robust set of actors from civil society to respond to humanitarian crisis inside the country may not have been there. And this is testimony to the fact that Syria was not, in its recent history, faced with what it's facing today. Syria has always been a destination for others, and you and I worked for refugees for many years. So this was the world's third largest refugee hosting country, coming only after Pakistan and Iran. So that created the opportunity for some of these NGOs, both Syrians, local, but very few international, to work with UNHCR and with the Syrian Arab Red Crescent in the response to the refugee crisis. But over the last 5 years, there has been an explosion of national NGOs. And this is a double-edged sword, which places a lot of responsibility on us as United Nations agencies, but also places responsibility on international NGOs. It's a double-edged sword because it's a mixed bag. There is the extremely capable groups, and there are ones which are at the beginning of the journey, and there are others who are in it for the wrong reasons. So our responsibility is to nurture that culture.
Moving to another topic, I want to ask you about a sensitive word that often people feel sometimes uncomfortable with, which is really about protection. It would be great if you can describe why senior leadership is important, and how did you go about bringing these 1-2 priorities that you work together with the other heads of agencies or NGOs to advocate and to bring a difference on these very important issues?
First, the not so good news. Syria is probably the most complex humanitarian crisis in the world today, but it is also, in my view, the worst protection crisis. It is already too late for the 300,000 people who have lost their lives in this conflict, for those who are no longer living in the homes where they lived 5 years ago, displaced either in the country or those who are in neighboring host countries where they are now refugees, or those who are on this human train on its way to Europe that has started last summer and never stopped. So it is a protection crisis in the deepest sense. So there is no way that I can sit here and say we have done everything we need to do. But what has happened over the years, indeed, and this goes back before some of us actually deployed to Syria, and I have been there now 3 years, as I said earlier, but the team that was there before, when sitting to discuss what needed to be done in response to the crisis back in 2011, the effort was merely seen as a relief effort. You take food or non-food, water or hygiene items and deliver them, and that's what is required. So the word protection itself, when mentioned, it was a bad word. If this is a measure of gauging how far we have come, if you look at the first iteration of the appeal that was put out by the UN and partners back in 2011, and you look at the humanitarian response plan for 2016, not only that you will see protection not as a word, because it's all over the document, but as a way of doing things, a way of doing all that we needed to do by way of response.
How did you go about, in a big and complex operation like Syria, to ensure that as a leader, as a humanitarian coordinator, as a member of a team, the humanitarian country team or the sectors working there, to make sure that you take into account the feedback of the people and you adjust, or you have this two-way communication and relation of respect and dignity with people who are in a really vulnerable situation.
Syria adopted an official position making serious reservations about the principle of accountability to affected people. This is one of the three fundamental principles guiding humanitarian work. So in the discussions we have every year when we try to produce the response plan, this is a recurring point. Mm-hmm. We have found ways around it. And more importantly, the fact that we are not bunkered and trying to deliver and do humanitarian work by remote. The fact that we go to these places, including besieged areas, the fact that we actually interact directly with the very people, as you say, we are trying to help. Wow. And we talk to them, and they have a lot to say in terms of the adequacy and the suitability of what is being delivered by way of assistance, but also what they think we need to do to tweak or adjust or change even. Because when you go to a place, you talk to people, and that we do quite a lot. Plus, and we talked earlier about means of communication, we are in constant contact with people we are trying to actually serve, again, through the new technologies that are there. When a convoy enters and reaches, they tell you, Ramadan is coming, why is there not this, and the other, and you know, many people will be fasting. Why do you keep just mechanically bringing the same basket of food as if there is no relevance or sensitivity to this particular season, be it Ramadan or a few weeks earlier? Others were also fasting in Syria before Easter was celebrated. So I think this is the beauty of the dynamic nature of what we are doing, much as the context is very complex, but the capacity of the people really gives us a lot to learn from. These are not people who are sitting waiting for handouts. These are people who actually lived in a country that was taking off as a middle-income country on its way to being a high middle-income country. But the crisis hit. The problem that is in Syria today is very deep. 82% of the Syrian population inside the country are poor today. They live on less than $2 a day. Giving more importance to how it is essential that when we do humanitarian assistance, we do it in an adequate way, in a sensitive way, and in a relevant way, not just to come and dump things and go and say we have delivered.
That's really vital indeed. Yacoub, I really want to thank you for joining me in this conversation on the humanitarian statement. I want to wish you the very best, going back to a really challenging job. And as you said, we really need to and hope to see a political solution, which is really the root cause to this conflict. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Panos. Thank you very much.
I really also want to thank all of you joining these conversations. This brings an end of this discussion with Yacoub Hillo, Resident Coordinator, Humanitarian Coordinator in Syria. I hope you found the richness of the discussion useful, helpful to take it to your own situation. Thank you and goodbye from all of us here.